Let's talk a minute about a theory that pretty much set the psychology world on fire in terms of emotion, and that's the James Lange theory. James Lange, two different people, William James, who was an American psychologist and also considered himself a philosopher, and Carl Lange, a Danish physiologist. And they changed the way that we, excuse me, look at how emotions form. They established a pretty specific order of how things happen. People traditionally believed that you feel the emotion first and then your body reacts. I'm afraid, so I start trembling, as an example. But James and Lange turned that idea around, and they said, we are afraid because we tremble. I hope you see the difference. I feel afraid, so I'm trembling. So I start to tremble. We are afraid because of the trembling. So they established a sequence, and the sequence is the perception, the physiological arousal, and the interpretation of the arousal. So if you want to put it in practical terms, you're walking a nice day in the woods and you see a bear. Your physiological arousal to that would be increased heart rate. You start running. In other words, the fight or flight reaction. And then the interpretation of that arousal by your brain is that you feel fear because your body is reacting. Feel is a key word. That's the emotion. So if you want it in short terms, stimulus, arousal, and emotion. Some of you may hike. We'll pick on hiking. Just a real world example. You are out again, you're out in the woods walking, you see a snake in front of you, your heart pounds, you jump back, your breathing quickens. According to the James Lange theory, you interpret those bodily changes and you label the emotion as fear. You're taught that, not born with that. This is something that's from the nurture side of the equation of nature nurture. You don't jump back because you're afraid. You became afraid because you jumped back. It's rather controversial, but here's the supporting evidence. It links, this theory does, emotion with the body. Psychophysiology is the area that covers that. There's some evidence really that supports it. People with spinal cord injuries who experience less physiological feedback from their bodies report weaker emotional experiences. Not all of them, but the great majority of them do. And then other experiments have shown that posing certain facial expressions can influence how we feel. It's called the facial feedback hypothesis. What your brain's doing is reading what your muscles are doing in your face. You can actually experiment with this, although you have to be open-minded, I guess. Smile for 60 seconds and see if your mood changes. It will have some sort of an effect on you. Maybe not humongous, but there'll be a change. There are criticisms. Cannon Bard, Walter Cannon, and his research partner, I can't think of Bard's first name, doesn't matter. What they argue is that they criticize William James. They say that different emotions can produce similar physiological responses. For example, both fear and excitement can cause your heart to speed up. I think we all know that. Body reacts too slowly to account for how quickly we feel emotions. That's another criticism. And then artificially inducing bodily changes, like increasing your heart rate, doesn't always lead to an emotional experience. So the Cannon-Bard theory argues that emotion and physiological reactions happen simultaneously, not in sequence. In other words, they happen at the same time. And there are other theories. Uh, James Lange compared to Cannon-Bard, and then let's look at a comparison to I think this guy's name's Clarence, but I'm not sure. His last name is Schachter, and his research partner Singer. They add a cognitive component basically, and you can attach it to either one, Cannon-Bard or James Lange. It says that you feel emotions based on two factors, thus the name, two-factor theory: physical arousal and then your interpretation of the situation. So if your heart is beating really fast, you'll label it as fear if it's because you just saw a bear, or you label it as excitement if you're about to go do something like ride on a roller coaster or some kind of stuff like that. James Lange theory doesn't have a cognitive labeling component. So it's kind of a little less complicated in terms of it being a theory. But James Lange still holds water. It's the first major theory to be tied to emotion and physical processes. Uh, Current research is done related to the biological basis of emotion. So most of psychology now is biology based because we're finding more and more and more connections between biology and things like emotion. And then we have an idea that goes along with that called embodied cognition. Mental states are deeply connected to your physical body. Uh, but you have to consider from a biological standpoint the nervous system itself and hormones. So all of these things tying together. What's the most correct theory of all? Well, they're all three considered correct. It depends on the situation. Think about your experiences. How many times has there been a delayed reaction to something that occurs, and then you feel the emotion? Or how many times has something happened, like a car pulls out right in front of you, and there's no time to think, but yet you have the emotion of fear? So they all are supported. Uh, James Lange was a pioneering idea. Uh, Emotions are not just mental experience, but basically bodily ones. It doesn't explain every aspect, but it does open the door to further psychological research. And it's not a new field, but it's a very new evolving field. So bear that in mind. All righty. Take care.